Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 8th of November 2024. I'm just about to shoot off sideways across the country for a bit of a jolly this weekend. I will be producing some content. I am also trying to extricate myself to some degree from Twitter. I won't be able to do it completely. And I'm going to try to use sources. There are a lot of sources that are on Twitter and Blue Sky. Blue Sky is an alternative to Twitter that is not so toxic. It is not covered absolutely. Twitter is just getting worse and worse. It is covered in bots and trolls and horrible sorts. Although there's been an interesting situation both on Twitter and YouTube over the last couple of days where subscribers, I lost loads of subscribers the last couple of days. Loads of big Ukraine and US politics sites have lost loads of subscribers. The conversation is about whether that they are bots and trolls or whether they are disengaged, disenchanted, depressed, people involved and engaged, otherwise engaged with American politics that have said, right, I can't handle it, and have kind of psychologically had enough and turned off the switch and unsubscribed from a load of different places. Because there is the question as to what the point of a bot unsubscribing, even if you pull the plug on a bot phone in a bot farm, they're all plugged in, then it would still exist as an account. So if you want to stop, if you just can't be bothered to continue all those bots, you just leave them there as accounts to just do nothing. But no, they've kind of unsubscribed, and so it's interesting to know what the reason is. But loads of people are having hits. Greg Terry, Prof Gerdes, myself. Rationality Rules is I know Stephen from there. He was contacting me last night, and that's a big old channel too with like philosophy of religion, but he's been doing political stuff and he's had a massive drop, so on and so forth. Tim White on Twitter, loads of people. But interesting, Elliot Higgins. So Elliot Higgins is Bellingcat, the open source investigative outfit started by Elliot Higgins. He says, just went to lock my account at the bad place, who's talking about Twitter, and the amount of garbage disinformation about recent events I encountered just reminded me why I left the place in the first place. It's really clear it's become a paradise for engagement grifters. And so I will be trying to follow suit, but the reality is that not all of the sources that exist on Twitter exist on Blue Sky. But anyway, you can go and join Blue Sky. It is essentially a Twitter carbon copy to a large degree. It's also, there is a Chrome extension where you can take your Twitter followers and pull them to Blue Sky. So that's really good. You can just, if they're on Blue Sky, it tells you, and then you can automatically follow the same people on there. And there are also starter packs that you can get on Blue Sky that people have. So you can get Ukraine starter packs that give you loads of Ukraine sources. So actually, it's quite a clever setup going on there. But anyway, I will just to let you know where I get my sources from. Okay, this is a speech from. And I want to go through this. I do want to talk you through the 2 minutes of what he says here. This is from the summit in Budapest where Zelensky has been speaking, and he's angry. I'll play you a bit with sound first, and then I'll turn the sound off and read the subtitles.
Зараз є 300 мільярдів доларів російських активів. Заморожених російських активів. 300 мільярдів доларів. Ми віддати просто квартири людям, які їх втратили квартири і не змогли знайти для себе життя, поїхали за кордон, а вони працювали в Україні і платили би податки. Можна нам просто передати гроші?
You can see that I just skipped it on to like a minute 15. He's angry, right? And he's got every right to be. So actually, let's go through what he says, because I think this is important. There are now $300 billion worth of Russian assets, frozen Russian assets, 300 billion, he says. According to the estimates from international institutions, the destruction they caused in Ukraine is about $800 billion. So a little bit of a difference there. There are $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets. Everyone is asking, what are you going to do if Trump won't support you financially? Where will you get the weapons? How will you defend yourselves? I answer, can we take the $300 billion that belongs to us? Can we take this 300 billion to support our people and buy weapons with this money in all the countries of the world? Can we decide for ourselves what type of weapons we need? Can we decide for ourselves what to do with that money? Can some European countries not block this? Can you give the money to us? Can we simply give apartments to people who lost theirs, could not find accommodations and had to go abroad? They could be working in Ukraine and paying taxes. Can we be given Russian murderers and oligarchs money that has been already frozen for specific reasons? And by the way, there is no need to talk about America right now because all this money is here in Europe. Is it possible to not solely look to America, but to be a powerful Europe, to make strong decisions and give us all that money? We will leave it here in Europe anyway, because we will buy weapons from Europe, from America. We will also spend it on our own speedier and cheaper production of weapons in Ukraine. Is this not the solution to the question of whether or not someone will finance it? We give very definitive answers. We are ready. It's really interesting that one of the things he mentioned in there was getting Ukrainians back so they can pay taxes. That's going to hurt. The millions of people that have left Ukraine as refugees to work elsewhere, to live elsewhere and pay taxes elsewhere. That will hurt. That will be hurting, continually hurting Ukraine. In terms of brain drain or labour drain, tax drain. There's a tax that is a loss of tax revenue. There's a really huge opportunity cost. Anyway, he is evidently starting to get angry. And I think you're going to see this from Zelensky more. And hopefully you will see Europe start to go, okay, we recognise that there is an issue here. And we either support Ukraine or we don't. Like, it's binary, right? We either do this or we don't. Are we going to do this or are we not? Because if we're like half-assed doing it, half-assedly doing it, then actually we're going to be piling loads of money into something that ultimately won't work. If this is going to work, i.e. Ukraine is going to prevail, we need to absolutely back Ukraine to the hilt so that it works. Half-assedly helping will not work and it will also drain European money. It's the worst of all options. Well, is it actually? Because if Ukraine loses, then there are some analyses that suggest that actually Europe will pay even more to a much larger degree. And we're going to go on and look at that. Right, so before we get there though, Emmanuel Macron supports the victory plan, which includes deep strikes inside Russia. So let's go and look at what he says with Olaf Scholz as they are speaking together. So we'll do the same thing here where I will put it on mute and talk you through his words. We support Ukraine in its resistance and defense of its territory, and we do not want any escalation. This is the same, of course you don't. This is the same framework in which we want to intervene. What was changed is that Russia has adapted its practices a little. Some of you, including a good evening newspaper in France, have published this map, which is very accurate, but which shows you that Ukrainian soil is being attacked from bases that are in Russia. So how do we explain to the Ukrainians that they have to protect these cities? And basically, let's just go back there because I missed that. So how do we explain to these Ukrainians that they have to protect these cities and basically everything that we see around Kharkiv at the moment? If we tell them you do not have the right to reach the point from which the missiles are being fired. I mean, goodness sake, this is me talking now. It's so frustrating it's taken so long. This is absolutely right, and well done for Macron for saying this so freaking openly, right? But it just blows my mind that it's taken this long. It's taken the US to fall apart, Europe to go, oh my goodness, and have a moment of reckoning and go, well, yeah. And actually, Macron's always believed this, right? We know that both the UK and France have been up for allowing deep strikes into Russia. It's just Germany and the US that are holding matters back. But he says here, in fact, we are telling them we are giving you weapons, but you cannot defend yourself. So we stay in exactly the same framework. We think that we should allow them to neutralise the military sites from which the missiles are fired. Music to my ears. The military sites from which Ukraine is being attacked. But we must not allow other targets in Russia to be hit, obviously civilian facilities or other military targets. If Ukraine is attacked from targets identified in Russia, well, I think we have to be able to allow them to do that if we really want to maintain our objective. And I think I can say that, in effect, we are not escalating because it's Russia that is organising itself in this way. Absolutely, 100%. What's interesting there, and maybe this is a bit of a halfway house, because they're saying, or he is saying, we would allow Ukraine to hit targets inside Russia from where Russia have attacked Ukraine, military targets. You can't hit civilian targets, and you can't hit other military targets. That's interesting, because I think it should be like green lights are saying you can hit all military targets. So I think this will be a case of the Ukrainians saying, okay, we are using our own drones at the moment to hit oil refineries and oil depots and ammunition depots and whatnot. And France is saying you can't hit those things with Western weapons, but you can hit air bases, you can hit areas from where they're attacking you. That might actually include ammo depots as well. It's not totally carte blanche, but it is definitely what the Ukrainians need at the moment, at the very least. So it's really encouraging there from Macron. No report says EU leaders are discussing how to sustain Ukraine's war effort if Trump cuts support. Some European officials said the real issues was not so much the money itself, which should still be there, but the available military resources that have come primarily from the US. This is also pretty much spot on. So it's actually, and we've heard elsewhere, I don't know if I've got this on one of my sources, but Zelensky has said that funding is fine until 2026. In other words, money's all right until 2025, end of 2025, at least, for Ukraine. What we need are resources, military weapons and equipment. And that's where the US has been absolutely fundamental. I've said this all along. When you've got 6,000 tanks sitting in a desert doing nothing, if that's the country that's able to help you, you have an incredible source for military aid assistance. The US can do things immediately in ways that other countries can't. Like the UK can barely keep 200 tanks going. And the US has all of those tanks to, yeah, they might need a bit of a buff up and a refurbishment and getting them to, before getting them to Ukraine. But my goodness, they've got a lot of stuff to draw from, if needs be. And for Trump to take over and say, yeah, we ain't gonna be doing this anymore, that's a real worry. So it's not the money worry, it's the resources worry. Because if those need to be put on order, like we just heard that the RCH 155 155mm self-propelled gun that the Germans are making actually is a German-British provision for, say, the British procurement of those, because we are starting to take those on. They're replacing our AS-90s. But I presume for the Ukrainians, they are going to be German produced entirely. Those are going to be delayed a little bit. Now, you can put orders into European manufacturing, but there isn't the stockpiles there of stuff that can be instantly given. There are ramping up of manufacturing processes and pieces of equipment, and hopefully that includes in Ukraine. We know that they are getting factories up and running. There are two supposedly pretty much up and running in Ukraine for Rheinmetall factories. We don't quite know what they're producing. I presume the Lynx is one of them, but possibly the Fuchs APC. Lynx is an infantry fighting vehicle. So yeah, there is production that's ramping up. The scaling up of production has been taking place, but there just aren't the stockpiles to instantly draw from in a way that the US is able. Right, the Kiel Institute, a well-known German think tank, has calculated that the cost of not supporting Ukraine is 10 to 20 times greater than the cost of offering that support. So in recent months, there's been a rise in political voices in Europe and the US calling for a reduction or cessation of military support for Ukraine. The Kiel Institute has attempted to assess the approximate costs associated with this stupid idea, says Yoni Escola. Some argue that financial support for military assistance extends the duration of the war, which is both peculiar and ironic. This is particularly true since many of the same people advocate for Palestine in its conflict, a struggle that appears to be much less likely to succeed. The Kiel Institute evaluates the expenses associated with military support for Ukraine against the anticipated cost of withholding that support. It finds that providing support to Ukraine is significantly less expensive than not doing so. To date, the average amount of German military support for Ukraine represents approximately 0.1% of Germany's GDP annually. According to their projections, ceasing support for Ukraine could lead to costs ranging from 1% to 2%. So that's 10 to 20 times of the annual GDP over the next 5 years. Consequently, discontinuing aid to Ukraine would lead to economic costs for Germany in the coming years that are 10 to 20 times higher than the cost of sustaining the current levels of military conflict. Europe needs to take action and boost its assistance to Ukraine, whether through common debt, bilateral agreements, or even by using Russia's frozen assets. And then the source there for the Kiel Institute. So, good stuff. Okay. Well, good stuff. It's just that, my goodness, I keep getting phoned. It's just that it is, I think, incumbent upon European nations to understand that it is much, much cheaper and much better and much more efficient for Europe to support Ukraine right now rather than leave it too late and then the costs escalate. Now, Zelensky, says Tendar here, a German source, and the current German opposition leader, highly likely the next chancellor, had a phone call this morning. He was asking the Ukrainian president, what do you need, money or equipment? This is what I was saying earlier. Zelensky said, apparently, we have enough money until 2026. We need weapons. We need long-range weapons with no restrictions. So Merz has been a guy who has repeatedly demanded to deliver that Germany delivers a Taurus missile. It's not only a good solution, which is specifically required by Ukraine, but also possible without increasing debts in Germany. So it might not cost, it depends how many they've got. And obviously these are going to be strategic reserves for Germany, but it's potentially a fairly efficient way of supporting Ukraine. Former German finance minister Christian Lindner. So this is a guy who had an argument with Olaf Scholz in the coalition party, not Scholz's SDP party, but the FDP. He was a finance minister. He claims that Scholz fired him over his proposal to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine instead of 3 billion euros in financial aid. Lindner suggested this is due to Germany's financial difficulties. There's been a lot of discussion about this, that it seems that Lindner wanted to give Taurus, probably because it wouldn't cost that much, right? He's a finance minister. Olaf Scholz, it's not that Olaf Scholz doesn't want to support Ukraine. He's actually asking for 3 billion euros to give to Ukraine. Lindner's going, hey, we got no cash, or I don't want to give you that, or whatever. But how about Taurus missiles? I mean, bought and paid for, they're there. Can we give them? And that obviously annoyed Olaf Scholz and led to an argument, and then Lindner's gone. Which means that there's probably going to be a complete collapse of the government and early elections called, or vote no confidence for January 2025, and then elections to be called probably in March. Now, no report says the EU Council has extended its support programme for Ukrainian military training until November 2026. That's really good news. Allocating 409 million euros, the EU mission will now collaborate with NATO to coordinate aid for Ukraine. So this is good. So in light of all the issues in the US, we've got NATO and the EU still doing things that are long-term and supportive of Ukraine. We should not be downhearted. Europe could come through. It's going to be tough. There aren't the stockpiles, but Europe could be at a moment of reckoning here and a moment of recognition. The World Bank will provide Ukraine with a new support package of 750 million dollars this time. Funds will be allocated under the Surge project for institutional reforms necessary for EU accession. Part of this will come from the Advance Ukraine Fund, supported by Japan's government. So that's really good. Again, money seems to be okay at the moment. It's about equipment. Now, wow, Mail Online reports, and no idea about the likelihood of this, but their headline is British troops could lead a multinational military force in Ukraine as part of controversial plans to end the war with Russia. So let's read this. Thousands of British troops could lead a multinational military force in Ukraine as part of a controversial plan to end the conflict with Russia. The shock proposal emerged last night as Putin, in his first remarks since Trump's election victory, dismissed NATO as a blatant anachronism. Under a peace being considered by Mr. Trump's security advisors, UK and other European troops would enforce an 800-mile buffer zone between the Russian and Ukrainian armies. So this is actually part of the Trump peace plan, which is where you'd have a demilitarized zone and European forces would be part of keeping that zone safe. Yesterday, Zelensky met European leaders in Budapest at a summit for the European political community, where he warned offering concessions to Russia would be suicidal for Europe. No United States troops would be sent to the war zone, and it would be for Britain and other states to pick up the tab. So if you're not a fan of that, then you're not a fan of Trump's peace plan. Okay, the plan so Trump's peace plan is to have European peacekeepers, and that includes UK peacekeepers, but not American peacekeepers. We're going to force you to have that plan, but we're not going to have anything to do with enforcing it. This is your problem, but we're going to force the solution on you. So, if you like that, you like that. The plan, first reported by the Wall Street Journal, matches the isolationist rhetoric of Mr. Trump's presidential bid. On a campaign trail, Mr. Trump criticised the US support for Ukraine, a commitment of $175 billion, which is incorrect, and boasted he could broker a deal to end the conflict. Last night, senior UK security sources reacted furiously to Mr. Trump's move, insisting it favoured Russia and condemned Ukraine to a carve-up of its territory. Speaking at a security conference in Sochi, Putin seized upon the vulnerability of NATO under a Trump presidency by mocking the organisation's reliance on the US. He claimed that without US leadership, NATO would no longer be able to dominate its zone of influence. Putin's assessment is supported by official NATO figures, which reveal that US currently spends twice as much on defence as all other members of the alliance combined. Mr. Trump's America First strategy includes withdrawing from Europe's security apparatus. Of course, that isn't the US, and I've talked about this many times, it's not the US spending that much money because they're forced to, because no one else is, and that's how Trump sees it. He sees it as a zero-sum game. We're spending this, you're not spending as much. Okay, well, are those countries as big as you? Do they have as big a GDP as you? How do they calculate whether they... Please go and check out my NATO spending video from last night, where it's important to note that the US includes its like this year, that's worth $60 billion, by the way. So they're spending $60 billion of their defense budget on healthcare for their serving members' families and retired members of the armed forces. Now, in other countries, that's just part of your universal healthcare system. So the UK, that's the NHS broadly. So the NHS will be, if like my dad was in the Navy, right? And when we wanted to go to hospital, we'd go to the local hospital. Like we wouldn't have to have healthcare insurance paid for by the armed forces. We went to the hospital, we went to NHS hospitals, we got a treatment, and bish bash bosh, there you go. It's nothing to do with the armed forces. Especially when you are, you're not on duty. Maybe different if you're in a war zone, you're going to go to a medical centre in an army provided or navy provided medical centre or whatever. But that's what we're really talking about, is just general healthcare throughout the year. Now the Americans include that in their funding for defence. We don't. So that's $60 billion they're spending. So when the Americans say we're spending 3.83% or 3.38% of GDP on defence, you're like, okay, well, how about you take that out, because we don't include that in our calculations. And then Viggo Holmson yesterday was saying, actually, you take that out, and if you take pensions, well, I'm not sure pensions are in the American calculations. But anyway, it gets down to like 2.64%, and then they're right in the middle of the pack. And then if you were to add, certain things that other people don't include, in other words, if you had if you had a uniform definition of defence expenditure, then it would be really interesting to see where everyone sits. And the US would sit more in the middle. So therefore, they are not justified in saying you guys aren't paying enough. Their whole economy is based on their massive expenditure on the defence, and therefore the military-industrial complex, and it's all integrated. That's been a process over the last 70 years. 100 years. It's been growing and growing and growing. So if they said, right, screw you, we're pulling out of NATO, we're isolating ourselves, we're not going to spend this and that and whatever, then actually that would screw around with their own economic and industrial output and strategy and their economy in general. They'd have a much smaller armed forces, they'd have a much smaller military-industrial complex, and that would cost the welfare system more in unemployment or whatever, and so on and so forth. Tax revenue would drop for military-industrial complex orders, and so this is much more difficult than just saying you guys need to pay more. That we're paying for you. You're not. You're paying on your own defences. I've said this a million times. But if Trump is still banging that drum, he needs that drum taken away from him. So on and so forth. Anyway, that's that. Right, the Biden administration is working to get all of the congressionally approved drawdown authority to Ukraine before the end of the president's term, according to the State Department. As for the seizures of Russian sovereign assets, quote, we're trying to operationalise that money before the end of the term. This is really good news, which is right. We've got $6 billion left to spend. Spend all that now. And we've got to do that in 70 odd days before January the 20th. And also try and get that stuff to Ukraine so that can't be halted by Trump if he comes in and says, actually, I want to halt that aid package that's going out, even though it's got through Congress. He might do something annoying like pulling stuff back from going to Ukraine. But also it's the frozen Russian assets, trying to get certainly ones that the Americans have control over, to operationalize that money, get it sorted out, get these agreements in place, and then use frozen Russian assets to support Ukraine in a way that Trump can't then just undo them. Good luck to them. Just get Ukraine everything you can at the moment. So here we have Sabrina Singh, who said that she's confident that the US would keep its commitments and that there are enough stockpiles to get those shipments to Kyiv before January the 20th. That's $6 billion worth of kit. Now, it's going to be interesting to see whether they put those orders in as USAI. I don't know how much is USAI and how much is drawdown. It seems to indicate, this source, that Alex Ralfoglu, that it's actually drawdown. It says approved drawdown authority. Is that all? Is the $6 billion all drawdown? I don't think it is. I think there's still USAI funding for orders, so they probably need to make some orders as well. Adam Kinzinger here, now advocating for Jake Sullivan to do one. Now it's time for Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor to Biden, who is particularly anti-escalation. It's time to put on his big boy pants and allow Ukraine to win. Biden must approve long-range strikes. Stop with the paralysing fear. And we have heard rumours from the Zelensky government that although we keep dooming about Trump, actually they've been more and more frustrated with the Biden government for their anti-escalation stance that has tied their hands behind their backs, tied the Ukrainian hands behind their backs. There's a deep frustration with the Biden government. So I think the Biden administration has the right morality, the moral evaluation and political evaluation, but they are beholden to anti-escalation rhetoric. And I think the Trump administration has the wrong moral and political evaluation, but they might do something on account of Trump's ego. So you've got these two different situations where you might have a weird situation where the Trump administration might work for Ukraine, but it's not working from a position of ideology, politics and morality that is in alignment with what I would conclude. They won't end up supporting Ukraine from a good place, is what I'm saying. They'll end up supporting Ukraine for suboptimal reasons, but for Ukraine, they won't care. I don't care if you support us because it massages his ego, or because you think it's the right political and moral thing to do, taking into account your geopolitical objectives. Right, that'd be the right justification for the right action. You can have the wrong justification for the right action. We can talk about properly justified beliefs here in terms of philosophy, but we won't go down that route. Okay. Right, the United States is organising a coordinated response with over 50 partner nations regarding North Korea's military deployments near Ukraine. State Department spokesman Matthew Miller said. So Matthew Miller here this is really good news from the US. We have been waiting for something like this. I don't know what it means though. I say it's really good news. Who knows what the response would be? It could be a coordinated response to sit on their hands. right? But there needs to be a massive bloody response to North Korea getting involved in the war, and it needs to have already happened, really, because they're already doing it. There should have been red lines that were set out, and it should have been the West saying, if you send those North Korean troops into war, we will allow Ukraine to strike X, Y, and Z. But now they're already in the war, you can't set down that red line, because they've already crossed what that red line would have been. So this is too late already. But what I do hope is that something coordinated is done, that the response is robust enough, more robust than just sitting on their hands, which is what they're presently doing. Right, quote, there is political opportunity and military utility to deploy European air defence capabilities around Ukrainian cities, says Joseph Enrotin, I think, who is the Director of Research at Capri, Associate Researcher ISCCFHM, and etc. etc. So it does strategies and whatnot. Away from, although that's to do with cooking strategies, away from the front line, freeing up essential Ukrainian capabilities for their defensive actions. But we need to go beyond the declaratory. In other words, let's stop talking about this and let's actually do something. And that doing something could well be providing French air support for Ukraine, say around Lviv, shooting down cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and drones. We can do that while your planes go off and operate on the front lines. You do the risky stuff, we'll shoot down flying munitions. Absolutely. Now, obviously that's not a French politician saying that, but when you start having these discussions in public, you hope they gain traction. Right, French aid to Ukraine reports that the presence of the DT-26 drone in Ukraine follows two deliveries from France announced in September 2023 and February 2024, when the Minister of Armed Forces, Sébastien Lecornu, announced the delivery of a total of 300 Delair UX-11 and DT-26 reconnaissance drones. So this is all good news. God, that's Prof. Gerdes calling me there. Sorry to give you those beeps if you hear them. There are several variants of the DT-26, but the one used in Ukraine, specifically with the 43rd Artillery Brigade, is called the DT-26E Tactical. It is specifically designed for ISTAR missions, so that's intelligence, surveillance, targeting, and reconnaissance. There you go, target acquisition and reconnaissance. So these are French drones that are being used. And we quite often see drone footage of stuff. We don't always know what the drones are, and quite often it could well be French drones. So these are Delair drones, and we've seen packages being announced from France of Delair drones going over. 300 of those is obviously really useful for Ukraine, so it's good stuff. And let's hope that continues. Just a couple more things to go through. The Ukrainian company 3D Tech is preparing to deliver the first batch of FPV drones controlled by fiber optic cable to the Ukrainian military. These drones are immune to radio electronic interference, making them highly effective on the battlefield. So the Ukrainian companies are coming up with, I presume this is 3D printing, 3D printed drones, I presume, to deliver fiber optic drones here. So this is what the Russians have done, and they've done effectively with 5, maybe even 10 kilometer fiber optic spools. And the reason why these are particularly useful is you can go into buildings and not lose the feed to the drone. So when you go into buildings or dugouts or whatever, the drone will lose the connection to the radio frequencies or whatever. But if you're connected, and they can also be interfered with by electronic warfare jamming. But if you're connecting things, effectively hard-wiring a drone through fiber optic cable, then that communication to the drone cannot be intercepted unless you cut the wire, right? So these drones can then fly around, go into buildings, and hit things without being interrupted by electronic warfare or losing signal. The Russians have done it well. As I've said before, one side will beat the other with some kind of adaptation, but you can rest assured that it won't be long before the other side finds out about it, works out how to do it, reverse engineers it from a stolen one or from a found one, and then does it themselves. That's why you need to hammer that asymmetry as hard as you can, as quickly as you can, because the other side will catch up. Okay, finally, an Estonian company, Frankenberg Technology, will deliver air defense missiles to Ukraine for testing by the end of 2024. This is pretty cool. These missiles are designed to counter drones and hit targets up to 2 kilometers in height, or high up. Deputy Defense Minister Klochka discussed this with the company's management in Kyiv. CEO Kusti Salm emphasized their goal to win the war with low-cost anti-drone missiles. This is good thinking, which is we need to take out these drones. We're taking them out with expensive, for example, NASAMS missiles, right, is going to be ridiculous. That's just way too expensive. There's an asymmetry there that it does not work in favor of the Ukrainians. That means that they can keep sending drones, the Russians, and the Ukrainians will bankrupt the Ukrainians in having to use these expensive missiles time and time again to shoot down low-cost, low-tech stuff. So you need cheap missiles that can do the job. That's why they've had things like Gepards and machine guns on the back of trucks, these mobile response units. That's low tech. Even like Skynex is to some degree like less expensive than missiles, but the Skynex system is expensive, and shooting all of those rounds into the air, those rounds themselves are expensive. And if you're using like 30 rounds to take down a drone, then those 30 rounds end up being more expensive than the drone. And you just think, well, they're just rounds. Actually, they're this big and they're like $500 a pop. Like 30 of them into the air, and like, ooh, that's a lot of money all of a sudden. So a missile, it's a small 2 kilometer range missile, sounds like if you can keep those costs down, sounds like a good option. Anyway, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support. Thank you for listening. Thank you for putting up with me. I will probably speak to you again tomorrow as I'm going to be shooting off. I've got the geopolitical stuff still to go, but I won't have time to do that. Please check out the article I have written on Only Sky. You probably will need to sign up to the to Only Sky to read this one because it's a subscriber only one. But it's free to sign up. I think I liked writing this article. I think it's a pretty decent article, but of course I'm going to think that because I bloody wrote it. Let me know what you think. The triumph of the fields. Our UK contributor looks at the American disaster with recently acquired humility, is the tagline there. So that's my tuppence on the US election. As I say, let me know how you feel if you have read it. Take care, guys, and I'll speak to you soon.